Yeah, all right, we are live.
Great. Thanks so much. Welcome everybody to the January 24th meeting of the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. We'll quickly go around the table and introduce ourselves. Then we like to ask everybody who's in the room to briefly introduce themselves and who they're here to represent. And then we'll turn it over to you to identify yourselves for the record. So my name is Kathleen James, and I am from Bennington 4/Manchester.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury, Pennsylvania, Essex District.
Richard Bailey, Loyal 2, Belvedere, Johnson, Hyde Park, Woken, and I live in Hyde Park.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Benton.
Michael Southwest, Caledonia Zoo.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Sutton, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Most Wyndham.
Great. Jack.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant, Williston, Vermont.
Super. And our guest.
Andrea Cohn, Vermont Electric Cooperative.
Great.
James Duffy, fiscal analyst with the Joint Fiscal Office.
Yeah, Lewis Porter, Washington Electric Co-op.
Jones Wiki with Lee and I'm here for GMP.
Gabrielle Molina with Bounce Rockland Martin, here with Vermont Electric and Washington Electric.
You're Sterling, Renewable Energy Vermont. Dark Dunkel, that's it.
Great. All right.
Hi, for the record, I'm Candace Morgan from Green Mountain Power.
And I'm Michael Burke from Green Mountain Power.
All right, so we are here today and we do have a couple of slides which Jack has graciously offered to share with us, and they're on the website as well. And so we figured we would give an overview of who we are, who we serve, and where we are in the state of Vermont, as well as some of our programs, and also really diving into, and that's why Mike is here with me today, to really talk a lot about our reliability and resiliency work in the face of an ever increasing, more intense weather events. We've really been putting a lot of focus and energy on how we're going to deliver those solutions for all of our customers, really starting with some of our most rural and central and southern Vermont, but certainly bringing that throughout the state. And so Mike will talk a lot about what we're seeing, how we prepare for storms and respond to them, and also what we're hoping to do and what we are doing to help deliver those solutions to all of our customers as well.
Super. And we have, I'm learning as we go, we're a committee with a lot of questions.
Sure.
We have been running over a lot, but we can't do that today because we have other folks who are here to share their time. So we're going to try something new. This feels micromanaging to me, and I don't like that. But committee, can we hold our questions? Let's let them get through their slides. Let's just see how that works. May not work.
And I will say, I know you have a packed schedule today, and you have also spent a lot of time this week on sort of utility and regulation 101. And so I kind of figured a lot of these slides we'll just go through super quickly, and they can be a resource for you all going forward. And always happy to answer any questions as needed, either today or at any other point that works for you all. So even though they look like a lot, we won't spend all the time there. So a quick thing about Green Mountain Power and who we are. You'll start to get familiar, I'm sure, with some of the various maps that show the state of Vermont. Jack, you can go to the next slide real quick. Thank you. That show the state of Vermont and the various utility territories. So we are the light green, kind of green on that map, which shows where our service territory is. So it really, stems from some of the northern parts all the way down to southern Vermont. And throughout the central space as well. The darker green is Washington Electric Co-op, and then the gray is Vermont Electric Co-op at the top. In total, we serve about 275,000 customers across that territory. About 85% of them are residential, 15% approximately are commercial customers. We have just over 500 employees, and they work across two headquarters, one in Rutland, one in Colchester, and then 15 district offices. And those district offices range from St. Albans down to Brattleboro, Poultney, White River Junction, and throughout the rest of our territory as well. And that's really where we distribute our resources and respond to storms. And that's where a lot of our field crews are based, so they can really serve the communities in which they're based as well. And then, like I said, some other facts as well there. A lot of our territory is very rural, especially in the southern parts and the areas that focus in that area. And that's what Mike will talk a lot about too, in terms of how we are restoring power and bringing resiliency to folks. We can go to the next slide. Perfect. as we talk about the grid and sort of what that looks like, it has changed a lot from when it was first built and deployed, and it's really become a much more distributed system. And so this slide is really meant to highlight what those types of resources are on our system that we manage and work in tandem with our various team members and the other folks that are managing the system to really help deploy the grid in a much more nimble and responsive way than it used to be back maybe, in the earlier times. And we have about 70 megawatts of stored energy on our system, and that's one of our greatest resources at this point, and one that we see a lot of potential and need to continue to build out because it's really dispatchable. And so we can tap into that whenever we're seeing a peak event that helps sort of bring down our needs overall. And it also delivers resiliency benefits to the customers that are hosting those systems in their homes. And so that's where folks are able to ride out an outage if it's on the grid because they have that whole home backup in that space. And then I also wanted to highlight some of the other resources that we manage and have on our system, including various generation stations like our hydro facilities, wind facilities, and some of the solar arrays too that are all here in Vermont and working together to help balance that grid and our energy needs. Similarly, this can be a bit of a resource slide in terms of some of the programs that you might hear about from constituents or have questions about. We work with partners to deploy rebates as part of the Tier 3 program, and that's something that's established under the Renewable Energy Standard, which I'm sure you all will get into a little bit more as time goes on. But that's where we deliver certain rebates that, on balance, save all of our other customers money because it's bringing on more electrification and more load. And also a lot of them can be tied to some flexible resources as well, which helps us manage like EV car chargers. We also have a couple different options for energy storage programs at the home level too. One is a lease program. One is a bring your own device program. And then we also are excited to talk about or to have launched an ARPA funded program with the Department of Public Service to deliver energy storage to qualifying income qualified households as well. So these are, like I said, mostly meant to be a resource and pique your interest on things. Happy to answer any of those questions when we get to that time, or certainly to come back at some other point as well. But really all of that helps to paint the picture of sort of how we are showing up for our customers and delivering, I think, in what they want and are seeking in this future. And then also in the face of a more challenging climate in terms of what those storms look like and what some of those resiliency programs really are that people want to see and have deployed for them. And so I'm going to have Mike now talk about those trends over time and how we're planning to address them.
Thanks, Candace. I've got, listening to where everyone was from, I actually spent 20 years of my life in the Bellows Falls, Windham County area, 3 years of my life in the White River area, and the rest of my life in the Chittenden County area. So I've kind of seen all parts of the state. But, we really succeed or not based on the experience of our customers. And, the last few years have been really tough. We started to see the climate changing and affecting our teammates, our customers, probably early in the 2010s range. And we started to do more programs to increase resiliency. And then in the last 2 years, pretty much starting in December of 2022, I don't know if everyone remembers a heavy wet snowstorm and then a windstorm that hit Vermont with just about 80-mile-an-hour winds. Since that day, we have had 50% of our storm costs in the last 13 years since December 2022. So it's really just, even though we were seeing the increasing frequency and strength of these storms, it's really picked up in the last 2 years, even beyond what we had thought we were going to see. That affects customers not only in terms of their experience in their home, being safe in their home or not, but also that cost eventually for that recovery and restoration. That affects the cost of the services we deliver as well. Another point on there is prior to those last 2 years, we used to see just over one major storm. Major storm is just a storm that hits a certain criteria damage, a certain amount of customers out for a certain amount of time. Barely over one a year. We've averaged 5 in the last 2 years. So just everything is pointing up in terms of what's happening with the climate. More frequent and stronger. That wet snow you see there, when I was a kid growing up in the 70s in southern Vermont, we used to get 2-3 feet of snow and it was no big deal. The difference now is that snow is a much higher water content. If you've got 3 feet of snow and it doesn't stick to anything because the water content is so low, we're not even having an outage. If you've got water content of snow to water ratio of below 10-1, it sticks like glue. So you think of ice storms, this is just as bad as an ice storm, if not worse, because you can't move around. At least with an ice storm, you can put cleats on, chains on the vehicles. With this, you can't move around, but the weight is the same. And, you know, if you get a foot, 2 feet of heavy wet snow, it's just destroying all the trees along our right of ways. It affects the poles and wires. And that's really been the majority, that and wind, of what's been affecting us. We used to see maybe 1 heavy wet snowstorm a year. Now we're seeing maybe 1 or 2 dry snowstorms a year. So it's completely flipped. What I will say on a brighter note, the last few weeks or month have been really nice. We like cold weather because you don't get that type of snow during this type of weather. Next slide. I am on.
Oh yeah, I think Jack, maybe just go back one.
Yeah, sorry.
There we go.
And this was just to, I want to talk a little bit about how we monitor to be prepared to take care of our customers, but also just to see this isn't just a Vermont thing. I want everyone to realize that this is a snapshot from April 4th, where Vermont experienced hurricane force winds on the western side of the state. We got through that. It was pretty rough, but it wasn't terrible. The next morning, everything on the eastern side of the state got about 2 inches melted equivalent of wet snow. And we finished the wind and we had to move to the east side of the state to start to restore the power from the wet snow. You can see this wasn't only a Vermont thing, it was all of the Northeast. In fact, even though it was really bad for us, I think around 45,000 customers were affected. You can see in parts of Maine, they had half their system down, parts of New Hampshire, almost a half. So this isn't hitting just Vermont, it's really the Northeast. The Northeast is seeing the most intense precipitation of any part of the United States. That's both in flooding, which is why I showed the flooding video. And when you get it in the winter, it's frozen precip, whether it's ice or wet snow. It just causes incredible damage. So we track many systems, many models. A lot of people at GMP have been doing this a while. We can actually understand what's going to affect the system, what's not. But in these frozen precip type events, 1 degree wrong or right can affect everything. Believe it or not, it comes down to that. So we have to make decisions whether it's going to be just light enough where it's not an event we need to prepare for, or do we need to prepare for. That's why we have so many different systems. Next slide. When we see these events coming, we do outreach. We've actually created relationships with the local emergency planners all over the state of Vermont in our territory. We send them updates. Hey, this is what we're seeing. We're preparing. We want to give you a heads up so you can prepare. We also communicate with our customers, whether it's via robocalls, direct emails, social media, and depending on how bad sometimes it's forecasted to be, we may do press releases and get it out on the press as well.
You'll also all start to hear from me, some of the folks that are new, whenever there is a storm, just sort of to have a sense of what that expected restoration time is, and just to, you know, share any info that you're hearing or feedback that you have from your folks as well.
That picture, there was an event March 23rd. We had, if you melted all the snow you got after an event, it would equate to a certain amount of inches from the ground, just like a rainstorm. That event that picture is taken from, he's standing up, by the way. That's heavy wet snow. That was taken, I believe, in Jamaica, Vermont. And it was equivalent on the Stanford border of 5.5 inches of rain. Where he was standing, it was 4.5 inches of rain. It equated to almost 4 feet of snow, and it was all low snow to water ratio. So the damage in that event was some of the worst we've ever seen. Nothing to do with us, but like Route 30 was blocked, Route 9 was blocked, state highways were blocked all over the place down here. So those are the types of events we're seeing that we didn't used to see all the time. The communities part, we talked about how we communicate with the communities. I'm going to come back to that in a minute when we talk about how we do outreach to some of our more vulnerable customers as well. So yeah. So we prepare, we have the 15 districts that Candace talked about. Every different color you see on this map represents a different district where we have a service office. We actually, in a big event, we staff dispatchers as well as our internal crews, as well as if we brought in external resources because of the severity we see, they will all be dispatched out of those districts. Again, we continue to communicate with customers, give them the best updates we have. In a big event where there are a lot of customers out, we give ranges so customers can make decisions. But that decentralizing from a normal day, we run our system with 2 dispatchers centrally. In a big event like this, we kick it out so you're not pushing as much through a bottleneck. And it's really worked well for us. We're proud of how we do on restoration. For those, I know some in this room have quite a bit of experience with electrical and how the restoration process works. But I thought it would be worth going over quickly just on a high level. So in a big event, we have to focus on clearing the hazards that I talked about, roads blocked, things like that. When a storm's happening and everything's falling down, trees and things like that, the first thing we focus on, we tell our crews, is we've got to get the roads open. We want emergency vehicles to be able to move around. We want our own resources to be able to move around. So that's the first thing we focus on. Once that's done and the public and everyone can travel unimpeded, we work on the transmission. So you see the big towers and the substations. We have to get that system on first, because if that's not on, the lines that go in your communities along your houses and roads, the transmission or the substation's out, we can fix that line in front of your house all day long. It's not coming back on. Once we get those on, we work on the main lines, which are the ones that feed, your main villages, probably pick up your hospitals, pick up your emergency operations centers, things like that. Once we get all that done, then we start to go to the more rural areas, the laterals, I would say heavily forested areas, which I'm going to come back to that too. And there's a reason for that. And then eventually we get to the single homes that are out. I know I'm going fast. Sorry. So the solution we're delivering to, I just mentioned that the laterals out in the rural areas. We have a program which we just got approval to do more undergrounding, more storm hardening, and also add more energy storage that Candace talked about in the beginning. What that means is in the villages that you're seeing, we're installing an overhead storm hardening system that the manufacturer, in our experience, eliminates 90% of all weather-related outages. It's got a steel cable at the top, stuff can fall on it, things can be touching it, it stays on. We normally come in, even if something's on it, we just lift it off. Customers never know anything happened. Those are the main lines where we can back up substations from each other, things like that. Where we spend the most time in our storm events is once you get those lines on and you're moving out to the more rural laterals that maybe feed 200 homes in state forest land, any heavily forested rural area. We're really trying to get all those lines underground. And that's not only a resiliency customer experience, safe in their home benefit, but it also, think of the cost of tree trimming, which is going up every single day. The cost of any overhead maintenance on the poles. We inspect our poles. We to make sure they're there. All those costs go away with that, as well as all the costs for responding to storm restoration. We see on where we've undergrounded lines, the calls just stop. You might get an occasional weird, a tree fell on a transformer, a pad mount transformer, but that's, if that happens 1 in 30 years versus trees falling on the lines in every hurricane force wind event, we'll take that. So it really bends the cost curve down. And then energy storage, we still know that the grid's going to be affected. There are things that happen, car pole accidents, the one tree on the main line that's big enough to break a pole, things like that. That's where the energy storage comes in. We went to visit some customers after that March storm a couple of years ago, year and a half ago now, and there were customers that lived by themselves that said they couldn't get out of their homes because they couldn't open the doors. They had 4 feet of snow. They couldn't get out of their homes. And that's when we really started thinking more and more about storage. Okay, if they can't get out of their homes, how can we keep them safe if the grid's having issues with all the damage from the ice or the snow? So we're pushing our original storm response. The mainline feeders will be hardened. The laterals will be underground. And if the customer's out on the end or out, they've got storage to keep them safe until we get there. Again, I hit everything on the cost. We missed an outreach slide, I think, that
Oh, maybe the bullet.
and what I wanted to talk about that, we talked about how we work with local emergency planners. What we do is we have a team that we have in our system, people call in and let us know if they have a medical device, if they have oxygen, if they have everything like that. We're finding customers they want to be home, so they're leaving hospitals. They're sending them home with oxygen concentrators instead of tanks. So they literally, if the power goes out, they have issues with that. What we've created is relationships with the local emergency planners, where if we are talking to a customer and we know that it's going to be a while before we can get to them, we're working with the local emergency planners to see if they have anything they can do to help this customer. I spoke of the one customer who had no family, no one around to help. And it's really become a great relationship where they will go pick somebody up, bring them to a more safe area. If they had storage, that unit would have never went down. We also have portable storage that, depending on how close we are, we can get them some portable storage too. You could plug a oxygen system into, things like that. So we're really working with communities to work to keep everyone safe out there. The last picture is pretty much just showing what we actually mean by, so that if you're looking, the upper right hand corner is what we call a spacer cable. So when you see that go in on the main roads in your communities, there's a steel cable over a 1/2 inch thick that trees can lay on, trees can land on, and the majority of the time, over 90% of the time, the power stays on. The undergrounding, how we've managed to do that cost effective now. You used to hear people say it's too expensive to go underground. We're not saying that anymore. We have a machine that we can use in rural areas. Think about rural areas. There's no sewer and water in the ground. The only thing we're dealing with usually is culverts, and we're working with the towns on how to get around the culverts to fix it. This machine can drive down the road at like 1 mile an hour. It can install power conduits, phone conduits, all in one shot. Within a 1/2 hour later, it's tamped. You don't even know the machine ever. I don't want to make it sound too easy, but we've already done some areas in southern Vermont that were, towns that are at 1,800 feet elevation in the southeast corner of the state, where you used to drive through there and see these overhead lines feeding anywhere from 400 to 800 customers, and you don't see the lines anymore. Our crews drive through there and they're like, this is great. They're actually bringing areas to us. Our crews now are saying, okay, let's do that next. They're on board. They're seeing what it's doing for the customers, seeing what it's doing for the team. And we're really excited about it, if you can't tell. I talk to a lot of customers myself during these storms. I know what they're going through. I know what our teams are going through. And this is really important to do for Vermont. The bottom left-hand corner is just what the cable and conduit looks like, the stuff we're installing with that machine. In other words, we don't have to go in and pull the wire in after. When this machine drives down the road and it stops, the cable and the conduit's already in the ground. All we have to do is terminate it and take down the overhead. So really having success with this, excited about it. And I think that's
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Happy to answer.
I know that was quick. Hopefully we hit everything, but if not, we're here.
That was great. I have a couple questions, but Representative Sibilia.
Just a clarification,
Sure.
The 50% of storm costs, can you say that, date again?
So
Again?
in Vermont, there's criteria, what hits it. We're all under this criteria of what is considered a major storm or not.
Yeah.
And when you hit that criteria, we track the cost for that. And all the way back to 2013 till today, 50% of all costs that have been for major storms have been since December 2022.
Okay.
And it was, we were starting to see the escalation before that, but then it's just gone through the roof. And it's become more statewide. It used to be more of a Route 2 South thing that sometimes we joke with some other utilities in Vermont. Unfortunately for them, it's now past Route 2 North. So it's really become a statewide issue.
So that's the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
all right. Undergrounding, what kind of target do you have sort of as in terms of proportion of your lines that you're trying to hit by, over the next few years, let's say?
Our long-term plan is to work to do about 3,500 miles by the end of 2030. Right now, we're starting off with about 150 to 200 miles in the next 2 years. We actually have approval to do that, and that'll really kick off in a higher. We only did 2 areas before we got this approval, and that'll start in May. And it'll hit the areas that have seen the worst storm damage. Think of mid-elevation side of mountain towns. You not only get more frozen precipitation being up higher, like Burlington, we're getting rain a lot when Londonderry's getting snow, right? Or wet snow. So we're focusing on central and southern Vermont, mid-elevation, almost forested.
So that's around, and that's of the distribution lines.
Correct.
Okay, so that's around a quarter, sounds like.
Of
12,500, you're saying?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And the reason that number was picked is we already have some storm hardening overhead out there.
Yeah.
And these are the lines that don't quite fit that criteria that we want to get to.
Okay, I have one other question. I actually have more
No,
questions, but I'll
Feel
keep
good.
this up to 2. Shared solar. Can you talk
Sure.
about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a tariff that we had launched, I think about a year and a half ago now, which taps into some of the bonus ITC tax credits that were passed as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, targeted towards low income and disadvantaged communities. And so it's a program that we stood up to essentially give renewable energy developers a way to show to the federal government that if they're seeking those additional credits to help buy down the cost of solar, we have a program to connect customers that would qualify with those benefits. So a bill reduction essentially. So they'll flow from the project to the customers that we're connecting that project with. And so I'm happy to share some more information too, but we have, I think, a couple projects in the queue that have selected and have been approved at the federal level for this additional credit. And then we'll be working to connect customers that qualify with those bill credits as well. So
just to clarify, this is a way of providing access to community solar to GMP's built community solar for low-income households.
Correct.
That's,
Right.
yeah.
nicer way to say it.
That's the follow-up to that.
Yeah.
Because I was under the impression that the offsite net metering program was going away. Is that not right?
Yes, that is going away in sort of the traditional group net metering sense, but shared solar is an opportunity to still find ways to connect customers with larger scale, more cost-effective renewables, but they still get the benefit in the form of a credit on their bill for being connected to that solar array. So it's not group net metering. It actually helps. There's no cost shift to the rest of our customers because it's partnered with the bonus tax credit at the federal level. And so we're able to still connect customers that otherwise might not be able to install solar on their own homes with an array that's being built and they're getting connected to that.
So was that the concern?
Correct, utility owned.
Was that the concern with offsite net metering, that it was cost shifting to other customers?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
A couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, I think we're good.
So your distribution and transmission lines at this point in time, how are they equipped and will they be able to increase or accept and maintain the increased load from electrification goals?
Oh, actually, that's a great point that I had forgotten to hit in our slides. I think it was discussed in one of the earlier presentations that you had this week about utilities and our integrated resource planning work that we do. And it's an every 3-year process where we look out at our system for the next 20 years and assume what the rate of uptake will be for additional electrification, whether it's in the form of additional electric vehicles or cold climate heat pumps or other things that are coming onto the system in the form of load growth. And we both look at what we see as the rate of adoption now, and if that were to kind of just continue. And then we also look at a policy case based on the state's goals, which is a much more accelerated curve. And so we do that work to make sure that we can, in fact, take on additional load. And so that is all part of our planning work that we just filed with the Public Utility Commission a couple months ago. That does show that we do have the ability to handle additional electric.
Right, so at this time, it's able to handle that. If you did nothing except follow what you feel you're seeing instead of the actual goals that are set by the state, would that be able to handle that? And if not, what would the increase in infrastructure costs affect? How would that affect customers?
Yeah.
So the stress test that we did as part of that planning, it shows, I think, 1 or 2 EVs in every home.
Yeah.
And that not only did we check if the system could handle it, but we also have tools out there. A lot of our EV programs and things have the ability to throttle up or down, turn these off when those need to be on, things like that. So there's a lot built into that, but we don't see an issue with it. What I wanted to add is what I forgot to mention, talking about all the resiliency work we're doing. All of these projects, we're actually adding larger conductors, more current carrying capabilities. So even though we're good right now, all these projects that we're putting in are actually increasing the capacity of all these lines we're working on. So our resiliency program is a twofold benefit. It's actually 3 or 4 benefit, but it also addresses any future load issues, anything like that too, because we're using larger conductors.
Okay. And how much energy are you getting out of your wind sites?
Right now, we own a approximately 6 megawatt wind farm in southern Vermont, and when it's producing, I don't have the exact.
We can follow up on the total.
But that wind farm is a 6 megawatt. We also offtake the 30 megawatts next to that in Searsburg, and then we also have Kingdom Community Wind in Lowell,
Correct.
and that is 63 megawatts. To give you an idea of the size of that, some of the generators in Vermont, just McNeil, for instance, is 50 megawatts. So Lowell is a higher output than that when it's producing. So we do have about 70 megawatts of wind, plus more from assets that we don't own, but we offtake.
I'm happy to follow up on more specifics there too.
Okay, thank you. Good.
That was pretty good. I mean,
Just for the record,
yeah.
I mean, I could ask questions.
Well, as could I, but when we've stacked folks up like this, I feel a dueling responsibilities. So, we have, everybody can certainly reach out to, no, go ahead. Go.
Thank you. Where are you burying that cable? Right down the middle of the road?
So we have existing right of ways where all these lines exist.
Right.
If that right of way is flat enough, not over culverts and ravines and rivers, we're trying to put it right back where it is because it's the easiest way to reconnect with the customers. Where we can't do that, and the only flat area that exists is the road, we're going right on the shoulder of the road, working with the town select boards, with the road managers, things like that, to get permission, make sure they understand, and we're doing what they want us to do. So a little bit of in the existing right of way. The ones we've done so far have been in the shoulder of the road.
Thanks. A very quick follow-up.
What's that?
Yeah, and are you doing underground to the residents as well?
Right now, what we're doing is in this first time, we're trying to get the main line underground so that we keep the 100 or 200 customers on, and we're intercepting whatever the customer chose to have in the first place. So if the customer has an underground, we're connecting the underground. If the customer has a overhead right now, we're connecting the overhead. That being said, if the customer approaches us and wants to put their line underground while we're there, we'll do that then too.
Thank you.
Just a quick safety question on the buried lines. How deep are they and how hard is it for me with my shovel to pry myself?
You would have to dig 48 inches down. And there's also about 12 inches above us, you'd have to go through the communication conduits. Another 12 inches above that, you'd have to dig through the underground warning burial tape. So you'd have to go quite a ways down to even get to us. And we're tamping this back at 90 PSI, which I'm not a road person, but I'm told that's harder than a lot of the road base. So, and we're putting stakes about every 200-300 feet that say, call, dig, say, Green Mountain Power line. So we're doing a lot to make sure that never happens.
Thank you.
Okay, I will hold my questions. It's very polite.
All right. Well,
Huh?
yeah, happy to come back anytime. Happy to answer any questions that you all think of before or after the fact.
Mine are not,
We appreciate the time.
mine are not burning, and I want to make sure committee members have is everybody good for now? Okay, I know your contact info was on the last slide. So folks you guys are always welcome to,
Yeah.
we'll have you back, or folks can reach out with their questions.
Please do. That would be great.
All right, great.
All right.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.
I don't think we need to do the whole off live on live rigmarole. We can just play musical chairs.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you.
Good morning.
Hi, I am going to we always have everybody in the room introduce themselves. So we had a newcomer. Hey, everybody.
Over here.
Hi, if you could identify yourself, please.
Absolutely. It's Jonathan Wolf with Primer Piper, Eggleston and Kramer. I'm in the room on behalf of the Burlington Electric Department and the Vermont Power Supply Authority.
Great. Do you guys want to sit down or do you want to stay by
I'll
the
make a
door?
move now. That's
Okay, now's your chance.
Yeah, that's what I
That's I'm
figured.
saying.
Lewis will make room for me.
Yeah.
Get by.
Great. All righty,
Excellent.
for the record.
Yeah, Lewis Porter, Washington Electric Co-op. I'm general manager of the co-op, and I'm grateful you're not allocating our time based on load share because I would already be done. So thank you. And if Jack doesn't mind bringing up the slides I sent him. Yeah, I think this is most interesting and most useful as a conversation. So I'm going to try to go through these very quickly and try not to repeat anything that Candace or Mike said. All of which I agree with the exception of him mentioning what a good winter we've had, because we try not to mention that and jinx ourselves. So everything else I very much agree with them on. Let me give you a brief introduction to who I am. I know I've known some of you for a long time, but others are new, and I'm new to you. So I have been in this building in one capacity or another fairly regularly since 2005. First as a reporter, and then as an environmental advocate, and then as Governor Peter Shumlin's political guy, Secretary of Civil and Military Affairs, and then as Fish and Wildlife Commissioner under Governor Shumlin and Governor Scott. And then in 22, I went to become general manager at Washington Electric Co-op, which, as you heard, was not opportune timing. We're seeing the same increase in storms that Green Mountain Power is seeing, and an increase in costs, obviously on a much lesser scale. So you might very legitimately ask why my board would have chosen me to run a utility, and it's a question I pose to myself sometimes in the middle of the night. And I think there's sort of two answers to that. Whether they're satisfactory or not, I'll leave to you. One is I've been a member of Washington Electric Co-op almost my entire life, with the exception of the 10 or 11 years I lived out of the state. And the other is I sometimes joke that Washington Electric Co-op is actually an environmental organization pretending to be an electric utility. The environmental and social mission of our cooperative is, if anything, only slightly less important to us than our reliability and service mission as a utility. We were early on in eliminating nuclear power from our portfolio. We've been 100% renewable for closing in on a decade. We don't use herbicides in our right of way, and we were early pioneers in both efficiency and renewable power. So I think that's part of the explanation, and the other that I was a longtime member. As you'll see, they did not hire me for my PowerPoint skills.
Is that it?
No.
I'm teasing.
Next slide, please. I'm going to try not to repeat what Candace and Mike said, but I'll just give you a brief introduction to who we are. As an electrical cooperative, we're owned by our members. The people who pay the bills are the owners of our organization. We're also a nonprofit. And we were created because the people who lived in our territory were not profitable to serve, not profitable for an electric utility to serve. So they amazingly created a utility and had the first generator turned on in less than a year, which is pretty remarkable to think about now. But like many other cooperatives around the country, we were built in a territory that was not easy or not lucrative to serve, and that remains true today. We are largely residential. We are very rugged territory with the least members per mile, the least customers per mile, certainly in Vermont and probably in the entire Northeast. We have about 8 or 9 members per mile, and that's the people that you have to share the costs across. We also have very little commercial and industrial load, which is another way that utilities ease the burden on the residential ratepayers. We have very little of that. We're about 95% residential by revenue. We're also seeing a few things that are increasing our costs, and in addition to the storm costs that Mike and Candace mentioned, which we are certainly seeing as well, an increased expectations from members. We have a lot of members who have moved to our territory or moved full-time to our territory, or who have lived in our territory for a long time, but who now work from home. And so they have increased expectations on reliability, as is fair enough. But coming at the same time that we're seeing increased storm severity poses a challenge for us as a small entity trying to do this work. We're also seeing increased regulator expectations and, frankly, increased expectations from the legislature. More programs, more things they want that you all and the regulators want us to report on and be involved in. And I would never advocate for a deregulation of the electric industry or even cooperatives. But I do think it's interesting that in many states, including in New Hampshire, cooperatives are not regulated essentially at all outside of their membership structure. So, like I say, I would not advocate for that, but it is costs that our members, our ratepayers, ultimately pay, and that are largely redundant to the 16 other utilities in the state. Just because you're small, it doesn't mean your regulatory costs are significantly less. Whereas a line crew, for example, you're going to need so many members of your line crew to serve the 1,300 miles of line we serve, whether it's part of Green Mountain Power or whether it's part of us or whether it's part of Vermont Electric Co-op. And we have, as I mentioned, we have 1,300 miles of line, enough to go from here to the state of Georgia, and 13 members of our line crew. So, about 100 miles of line per member to keep on. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we began in the early 20th century. George Aiken, former Vermont governor, was a central figure in the electrical cooperative effort nationwide, and turned the switch on the first generator at Washington Electric Co-op. And so the special, now that there's 800 electric co-ops around the country, it's kind of a special point of pride for us that this was Vermont was his home territory, and the 2 cooperatives here were obviously, have a special place in that cooperative world. As you can see from the picture of the bulldozer, when they built our lines in our territory, lines were very expensive and labor was cheap. And there were very few trees in Vermont, but it was about 80% cleared, whereas it's now 80% forest. So they built a lot of the lines using equipment like this bulldozer and horses, and they built them the shortest possible distance, whether that was along the road or not. So that's another challenge for us. Our line crews spend a lot more time climbing utility poles than in a more urban or suburban area. That's tough, very difficult, tough work, and time-consuming, slow. We have tracked vehicles that can go across that landscape and set poles and have buckets in them that can reach some of our areas. But a lot of the time, our line crews are hiking out with their equipment on their back to put lines back up. Yeah.
So I know we're going to hold questions, except for this one. I don't understand why is your service territory not
Contiguous?
Yeah, like,
Because Green Mountain Power serves all the paved roads in our territory. We serve all the dirt roads.
gotcha.
In rough terms.
Okay, thank you.
So the Green Mountain Power territory is built out first, and the Washington Electric territory came along to serve those farms and rural residences that weren't served.
I see.
And
I
it would
see.
be our residential rates would be lower if we had those areas that have village centers and then have commercial and industrial load in them. The municipal electric departments are in an interesting position because they were built out mostly in the villages and town centers. That's not 100% true. There are some like Hardwick that are quite rural also, but we are just the rural areas. So
Interesting. Yes.
Just put a pin in the co-ops and rural electrification, the CUDs.
It seems very familiar.
There's, yes,
Familiar.
it should.
Yeah.
very,
Sounds like a
Yeah.
familiar model.
very.
Okay.
Next slide. So I do want to talk briefly about our storm response, and I won't repeat our efforts on a much smaller scale are very similar to Green Mountain Power's, probably a little more, probably a little less organized and definitely on a smaller scale, but we do similar outreach for storms. We are all on the same prep calls together. We rely on them to a great extent and to the other utilities and Vermont Electric Co-op, Green Mountain Power, Stowe, Burlington have all sent us crews over the last few years to help during outages. So we rely on each other a tremendous amount. I have to say Washington Electric does not return that favor as much as I would like. We do it a few times, but when there's storm damage in Vermont, we're probably going to get some of it. And so we need to keep our crews up close to home for that period. This bar graph is merely trying to illustrate that for the rural service providers, us, Green Mountain Power, and Vermont Electric Co-op, a tremendous amount depends on what weather there is, where it hits, and when it hits. And when it's your turn in the barrel, you may see a significant difference in the outages you face than even your next door neighbors. So these are 3 storms over 3 different years that I picked because they illustrate this point. Obviously, there were storms where we all had roughly the same damage, but in each of these storms, one of the 3 of us each had a very different share of our membership, of our customer base out of power. And a lot depends on where the storm hits, how it hits, and what the wind direction is, things like that. We've had within the last couple of years storms that we thought were going to be nothing and ended up being quite severe. And we've had storms that we were really preparing to wallop us that happened to hit literally on all 4 sides of our territory. We had very little damage. It's very hard to predict. Next slide, please. Sorry, this quite small. Sorry about that. This is our illustration of our power portfolio. We own the Coventry landfill gas to electricity plant, built it in 2005, and it produces close to 70% of our electricity for our members. It has been a huge benefit to us and to our members. One of the wonderful things about that plant is that it's both renewable and base load power, which are not common to go together. So
Explain baseline.
yeah. So the amount of power that you produce matters, but the timing matters almost as much. And you need power when people are using that power. And our territory tends to be in the early evening, and we peak in the winter. So it's more in the winter than in the summer. A wind or solar facility is obviously, in the absence of a big storage battery, is obviously limited to produce when the wind's blowing or when the sun's out. Those don't tend to line up very well with power usage. Baseload power is that power that you could have on more or less 24 hours, 7 days a week, or turn on and off and have supplied when you need it. And that's what the Coventry plant does for us. Now, obviously, we have maintenance on that plant. There are times that plant's not producing at full power for various reasons, but having that 24/7 available electricity is a huge benefit to us. We also get hydropower, some power from the Reigate wood chip plant, some Sheffield wind power, and HQ power from Hydro-Quebec. You'll see this darker green block is NYPA power. That's New York Power Authority power from hydro facilities that were built many years ago. We get a share of that power, and it's great for us. It's 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So you'll hear various prices for various power. I think the most recent standard offer solar projects, so that's larger solar projects, were bid in at 8, 9, 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So you can see that NIPA power is very valuable to us. Unfortunately, it's allocated. We can't get any more, although we would love it if we could. Next slide, please. Great. So I wanted to talk about climate change and greenhouse gas emissions as it relates to Washington Electric and to the Vermont utilities overall. It's been a tremendous success story that I don't think we celebrate as much as we should in the electrical world. Electrical power in Vermont is now only responsible for 2 to 3% of the total state carbon load. It's headed to zero with the res bill. Well, it was headed to zero, but sped up with the res bill last year. I don't think we always appreciate the significance of that and the fact that Vermont now has the cleanest, from a carbon standpoint, has the cleanest power portfolio in the country. Essentially, we need to move things as much as we can into electrification for that, from a carbon standpoint, for that reason, as well as other reasons. We're in an interesting crossroads with climate change because we are both actively working to lower carbon load, but we're also seeing the impacts of climate change in our storms and in the amount of storm damage that we receive. And so I kind of view our industry as right at that crossroads where we need to be spending money on both. And I would argue that we have been very successful in lowering the carbon load that comes from our electric sector, but we need to focus also on preparing for and mitigating the damage from those climate change storms. And I agree that Green Mountain Power is in my view is leading Washington Electric certainly in some of those areas. We're learning from what they're doing. I will put one little downer note on the undergrounding piece of that, which is that while the cable and conduit does greatly reduce the cost of undergrounding, and we are doing more undergrounding as Green Mountain Power is, we have seen some storm damage, some flood damage that in the last few years that would have been very damaging to underground lines. If there's no land, there's no underground. And those we have to prepare. I'll just speak for us. We have to prepare when we do underground lines for the potential for flood damage, eliminating those lines and the length of time it will take to restore power to those areas. A longer period of time than overhead lines generally. And so if you look at Great Brook and Plainfield, and you look at some of the other storm damage we've seen in our territory in recent years, underground lines there would have been unearthed. And the overhead lines, while they did get damaged and we did have to replace some poles, was, in my opinion, quicker to restore than it would be even with the cable and conduit technology. So just from speaking from WEC's perspective and not from Green Mountain Power's, just a note of caution for us on underground. And we have had older underground technology fail as well. So it's not that you never have to look at it or touch it ever again. Last slide, please. One more challenge I wanted to highlight, which is not unique to Washington Electric, but we are probably most affected by it, is the cost impacts of net metering. I'm very proud that Washington Electric was so forward-looking in terms of developing renewable power. We invested a lot of our members' money in developing renewable power, particularly Coventry, but other places as well. And it has been, I'm very proud of that as a member and now as general manager. There's been a surprising, well, maybe not surprising, but there's been a negative part to that in two ways. One is when we have net metering power, since we're already 100% renewable, it's replacing other renewable power and at higher cost. So that essentially means that it's not increasing the amount of renewable power in our portfolio. We're merely selling renewable power at a loss into the market in those times. The other way is that a lot of the recent federal investment in renewable power, which I'm very supportive of, was designed to move utilities and particularly co-ops off coal and fossil fuel power. We're not eligible. Because we've tried a few and we've tried some creative, I think, ways. And I don't want to complain too much because we've also been the lucky recipients of some federal and state money. But when we apply for these grants that are designed to remove coal from the portfolio nationally, we're unlikely to get those because of this. So let me talk specifically about net metering for a minute. I've tried here. These are not direct quotes, but I think fair summaries of the biennial update that the Public Utilities Commission does every 2 years on net metering. And their concerns are the same as mine, that net metering is not the least cost way to move towards renewables, that the increase in rates that come along with net metering are providing a disincentive to beneficial electrification. And third, and just as important, is that those who are unable to participate in net metering because of financial reasons only see the cost increases. So when you look at Washington Electric territory, our towns that have more well-to-do residents in them tend to have more net metering, and the towns that are highly energy burdened, which is electric industry speak for less well off, tend to have less. And so the cost shift among our membership, which we estimate to be close to $1 million a year, is of significant concern for us. So that's 15 minutes or 20 minutes on Washington Electric, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I do have, I wanted to learn a little bit more about your rate you talked a little bit about rate regulation.
Yeah.
So you said, would you talk a little bit more?
Sure.
So I mean, you're regulated just the same way as any other utility in setting your rates. You have to go to the PUC.
Yeah.
But you had mentioned something else. So.
Well, just that, and to be clear, I'm not advocating for this in any way.
No, I heard you. I heard you.
As somebody who ran partially a regulatory agency, I don't advocate for that. But other cooperatives in other states, the attitude is that they will be regulated. We're run by a board made up of our members. They run for election, just as you all do. And the view in other states is that if the membership is unhappy with their rates, they will elect a new group of board members who will bring those rates under control. And we have a two-step system. We have both our board and also the Public Utilities Commission that sets our rates.
With that though, and I understand nobody's going to do this. I'm engaged in intellectual exercise, but it seems to me that the rate regulation by the PUC is an independent kind of quasi judicial body, which would be insulated in some ways from elections, I guess, local elections.
Well, it is. Well, it is and it isn't. They set their rules and regulations based on the laws that you all pass.
Right.
So it is quasi judicial and it is independent from the election process in that way. But they react to the laws that you all pass and to the policies that you all set as they should. And then we have, of course, our board is elected, and we've been fortunate in recent years to have competitive elections, to have more people. It's not easy to get people, as you all know, engaged in civic life, and it's a significant time commitment. And we've been lucky enough to have more board applicants than we've had seats, which is not necessarily common around the country.
I was just curious.
Yep.
Yeah, I also just want to push on this regulated versus deregulated, and just ask you maybe to reflect on, I think it was 2022 when natural gas prices went through the roof with Ukraine. And of the 6 New England states, I think there was one whose electric rates did not double overnight. And that was Vermont.
Yeah. So in the other states where there is deregulation of the industry, they certainly face more price volatility because the price of electricity, wholesale electricity, is much more directly tied to the rates people see. And I think that was a great example of why Vermont was, Vermont considered deregulation, and I think Vermont was very wise not to go in the deregulation direction. My point about all of this is that we spend a lot of money to comply with regulations, and all of that effort and money is redundant to the 16 other utilities in the state. Because they all have to do it. So, if I'm paying a member of the line crew, that money would be spent no matter whose territory they were working in, whether it was one territory across the state or whether it was many. You need line crew members to put wires back on poles, and when you're paying for my time to engage in the regulatory process, that's a redundant expense to the other 16.
So are you arguing for one utility in the state?
No, I'm actually arguing that we ought to look at the regulatory system and think about how we can streamline it and make it cheaper without losing transparency and oversight. And I think there's ways. I have a lot of suggestions, which I'm happy to bring back, but I think there are ways to do that without losing the oversight or the transparency the regulation brings.
Let's see. I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Great.
Great. Interested in Rep. Sebelia's questions also. I noticed on your pie chart, you did not list a price for Sheffield Wind.
Yeah, I just it's 6.2 cents.
It's not that far out. Okay, just curious about that. I'm also channeling Rep. Southworth's questions about capacity for electrification in the wires, and with the question that Mike had about that of the GMP folks.
Yeah, the capacity for distributed generation is more of a challenge for us than the capacity for beneficial electrification. And the reason for that is that we are in a situation where on most, if not all of our substations, the greatest stress on the substation is backfeeding when solar is producing and people are not at home using electricity, rather than downstream when people are using electricity, if that makes sense. So
that means the transmission
no,
system or
no distribution too. I mean, when you have a lot of solar generation or any kind of generation, distributed generation on a system like ours, it has to have the capacity to take power both directions.
Yeah.
When you have those things lined up, it works really well because you're actually diminishing load by production of that solar, or inversely diminishing the need to send power back up into the system by the use of by the load. Unfortunately, when those things are not aligned, either direction can cause a stress on the system. And what we see is greater stress from the backfeeding from solar generation than we see from download. Now, not to say that we won't and don't need to upgrade parts of our system to accommodate increased load. We're predicting about a 3% load growth annually over the next few years. So we will certainly need to do that. But we are right now in a situation where we need to upgrade substations to deal with the backfeed of solar production.
so it's the substations that are
well, in our case, it's two substations that are particularly affected. Others on the cusp of that. In some cases, it may be wires or transformers or other things as well. Obviously, the substations are the most expensive thing to upgrade.
Okay.
Now, I want to be fair about this and clear about it, that it's very hard to parse out when you're doing a substation rebuild. It's very hard to parse out costs due to any particular area. So these substations are old substations built on utility poles, not built on steel structures. Those utility poles are getting old, like wood does, even when it's treated. We need to rebuild those at some point in any case, just because for structurally, many of our other substations we've rebuilt. But part of the reason we need to rebuild them is we need to hang bigger transformers on them than the wood can support. And that is in part because of the solar production. I know I'm giving you a complicated answer, but it's very difficult when you get into trying to parse out the particular aspects of costs due to what particular activity. It gets very complicated.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Complicated than I
I think I got it. Yeah. Thanks, I'll let somebody else. Thank you.
let's see, what order,
But they were first.
you guys find it out. Victoria,
Me, thank you. Couple of questions. First, I just wanted to revisit the question of energy burden that you mentioned in our smaller communities. And the fact that all of our utilities have some sort of energy assistance program.
Yep.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on the need for more of a statewide approach to that, considering the cost shifting that you've been identifying.
Yeah, it's a real patchwork, as you know, across the utilities, and some of them have a direct rate reduction program. Others, like Vermont Electric Co-op, was kind enough to allow us to piggyback on their low income solar program. So we are participants in that, although they do all the work. So I'll leave Andrea to talk about how it functions. But a little over 100 WEC members are now benefiting from that program and having reductions in their bills. We also do low income programs through our tier 3 incentives. Those are geared to income. If it is policy makers' decision that all utilities should have a subsidization rate for lower income qualified members, I do think it should be on a statewide basis. Not surprising, given that I come from a utility that has a fair number of towns with people in them that are not particularly well off. Right? If I was in a different territory, I might be arguing differently on that. But I do think it's unfair to have moderate income people in Washington Electric territories subsidizing lower income people, when in some territories that's a very different mix of people, very different mix of burden. Having worked in state government for quite a while, I'm also a little bit concerned about the benefits cliff, and where you get in a situation in which you're helping somebody at the top end of the area in which they genuinely need help, and I don't disagree with that at all. And that price is falling on the person who's just out of that range. And so, like the human services programs, we have to think carefully about how you do the gradation out of that. I will say that while I'm supportive of a statewide income-based program, any additional, to the regulatory thing, every additional program comes with additional reporting and regulatory requirements, as it should, but add to that over in that administrative faster.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah.
Quick one. Back to the pie chart, and the Coventry. That's a big chunk of our energy mix. So in our IRP, it's 20 years. Are we anticipating that Coventry's lifespan is going to be beyond 20 years? I don't recall.
Yeah. So yes, our contract runs for the mid to late 2030s with the landfill, but the landfill will continue producing gas for quite a while after that, given the new addition they made in it.
My question has to do with the age of structure. You mentioned then Governor Aiken and the rural electrification that perhaps after the World War II to mid 54, 56, the age of your pole plant and the size of the conductor that was put in those 50s. I think you have, when I last was exposed, you had pretty old pole plant, lower class poles, and over 40, 50, 60 now, 70 years old.
Well, we do have poles still in place that are date back to those first installations. Not a lot of them left, but there are some. We do pole inspections annually and hire a company to come and do cores of those poles and inspect them, make sure they're safe, usable. And I don't think we're out of line in terms of what we're finding in terms of poles that need to be condemned or replaced. We have replaced a lot of poles and a lot of conductors, and we have done even more since the CUDs have come along, and as part of our make ready work for them to make sure those poles are large enough and tall enough to support their additional wires. And we have changed the size and grade of poles that we use now. So the ones we're putting on now are larger and higher grade.
And you said rural electrification was line of sight, shortest utility, shortest line. Do you have a program to move roadside, take advantage of the clearing of the roads for reducing tree line clearance costs and the like?
We do some of that. The challenge for us in doing that is that because we have such a distributed population that we serve, you're undertaking extremely expensive work just to improve service to a small number of people. So we try to balance both the opportunity to do that kind of work and with the number of members that it will benefit. I will say, I grew up on a Washington Electric line that was a mile long to serve one house, including across a beaver pond. Before I went to work at the co-op, they've actually moved that line to the road. But that was a very expensive project to serve one house. And so we do both. We are also doing we have a FEMA mitigation project that we're working on now to do that, the kind of conductors that Mike mentioned with a guide wire, with a protective wire. And that will be, I think, the first time we use that construction technique in our territory, and I would anticipate using more of it in our off-road sections. But and we do have in our construction work plan projects to move things to the road. I will say it's hard for me to justify a $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 project that serves 5 houses. The rest of the membership is paying for that through loans. So I think we will always have a significant share of our wires and our equipment off-road, given that we need to maintain crews and equipment that can service that line. I think that diminishes some of the benefit of moving to the road, because we'd have to maintain that tracked equipment and those crews in any case. But we do some of it.
Well, we're going to do 2 more quick questions, and then I misread our agenda. We need to move. Sorry about that. Sorry. Apology. No, that's my fault.
I told you 15 minutes ago.
I know.
Sorry, that's my fault. I had a brain disconnection.
Would it be a fair statement that the increased goals for electrification has made you look at speeding up the upgrades to your system? And if that's true, is that going to equate to a lot higher rates for Washington Electric's customers?
I would say to some extent beneficial electrification has done that, but distributed generation has done it more and to a greater extent. And yes, we are fortunate that we can borrow money from the federal government at a very advantageous rate. And that's why it's economic for us to serve our members at all, frankly, because we basically borrow money at the same rate the federal government gives itself. But anytime you spend millions of dollars to upgrade your system, somebody has to pay for that ultimately and pay back that loan. So I would say that yes, but at the same time, the more, like anything any business, the more you can serve people, the more volume you can serve people of whatever you're selling them on the same system, the more efficient it is. So beneficial electrification also has the advantage of allowing us to sell more kilowatt hours to spread over those kilowatt hours, those costs.
But at the same time, like 2.91% increase to cover increased property taxes, which were generated here as well. So we're looking at increase all the way through, which funnels right down to our customers.
Yep, and we do pay property taxes. I could argue that we should, but that was an argument that happened in 1939. So we do pay property taxes, and that rate increase we had was due to that, as well as some other increased costs, including our contract with our employees, but other costs as well.
We should talk sometime.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you.
Quickly.
Yeah, methane pretty corrosive. And how is your maintenance? Is it a lot quicker turnaround to repair or keep that plant maintained?
Certainly more than if it was natural gas, if it used natural gas, for sure. Now we get it a lot cheaper than we would get natural gas. But yes, certainly. So we just did over the last several years, we just a massive, I don't want to the exact amount, something in the neighborhood of $250,000 or $300,000 pipe upgrade for that exact reason. Those pipes were corroded on that. Now when we replaced it with stainless, so that will help. But yeah, it's a when it comes into the plant, it's a corrosive and dirty fuel that has to get cleaned up.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry.
All right.
to go long.
No,
Thank
that
you.
it's my fault. I didn't realize yes. Anyway, my fault.
Morning.
Morning.
Andrea Cohen, Vermont Electric Cooperative. Nice to see you. Hope we're I'm gonna cut into Ken's time because Ken, I just sat down. So sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, my
All right.
apologies.
Jack has some slides. Oh, I printed 5 because you asked for 5, but
Yeah, we can pass those out.
okay. Some people wanted paper, I guess. Okay. So Vermont Electric Cooperative, we've seen this map. Oh, you could go right to the next one. Vermont Electric Cooperative is the second largest utility in the state. We're the largest member-owned utility. You can see our service territory is that northern part of the state. We have we're a democratically run cooperative utility. You can see we have 7 districts, and we have senators and reps, kind of the analogous. We're elected board members. You could go to the next slide. A little bit about VEC. You could see that picture on the top. That was VEC's energy. How do you even say that word? Energizing Day. In 1938, we go way back. We're still in the communities. Currently, we have 33,000 members and over 40,000 meters. Louis mentioned the meters per mile as being something very important. We have 16 meters per mile, so we're a little more dense than Washington Electric. How that translates, of course, is there's less members to share costs, and it costs more to serve those members when you're in a rural service territory. We have 75 communities. We pay $5 million in property taxes. You could see kind of at a glance a little bit more about us. I talk fast. I'll just go fast given the time, but we're in 8 different counties in the state as well. We have 106 employees and some interesting differences. I'll try to just note differences from the utilities you've heard from already. Our load is about 50-50 residential, non-residential. And our demographics, we do an annual member survey every year. We know a lot about our members, not only because they come to annual meeting, not only because they communicate with us regularly, but we do this member survey every year. And what's really interesting and a little concerning is about half of our members aren't fixed incomes. More than half of our members are 65 or older. And they've been with us for a long time. Almost half of our members have been with us 20 years or more. Old demographic, and also the next bullet, you'll see relatively low income. When you look at those energy burden reports that Efficiency Vermont puts out, which are a great resource, 7 of the top 11 towns with the greatest energy burden are VEC members. So that really informs how we provide service and our positions on policy. And maybe I'll touch more on policy versus background as I'm going through for your information. As a co-op, the next slide, we have certain things that we're really proud of. We love our cooperative model. We have a community fund where our members round up their bill every month. We have a committee that makes decisions. Community nonprofit groups in our community can apply for community grants, and we do things like food banks and the fire department and school groups can apply and get grants that the co-op puts back out into the community. We're really proud of that program. We also have, if you remember, like of your local food co-op or whatnot, we have dividends. Our members get back what we call member capital at the end of the year. Our board will release funds. That's after we invest in our infrastructure and cover our costs. If there's anything left back, we return that to the members. So that is another member benefit. We're part of the NRECA, which is the National Rural Electrical Cooperative Association, and we get a lot of learning and a lot of support from those folks. Next slide. The member demographics, again, this is illustrating what I was talking about. Our members are relatively old, getting older. You can see over the past few years, the bar chart for 65 and older is increasing, and you can see that over time, how that's going. Next slide. This is that I was referencing the energy burden report. You can see those red towns. A lot of those are ours. Those are the towns where the folks have the highest energy burden. And it's two parts of that. How much money do you have and how much do you have to spend for energy? And that's how they come up with that. When we go to our priorities, and this really informs when we're in the building talking to you, these are the things that everything goes through this lens. Can we keep the lights on? Does it help us keep the lights on? That is the most important thing we do. We have a lot of cool, interesting other programs I'll talk about, but we're not doing this. We're not doing our job. This is the most important thing. Are we doing it in an affordable way? And a lot of the policy choices, really, there are ways to do it cheaper and there are ways to do it more expensive. So when we come and we push back on something, we're not saying it's a bad goal to increase this or do more of that. Often we're going to come back and say, but there's a lower cost way to do it. Or we don't need your help. We could do it and we could do it efficiently and cost effectively. So please, like in advance, understand sometimes we'll come in and we'll say, we don't think that's a great idea. It's not because we don't appreciate the goal. It's more that there's ways to do it at a lower cost way. Lewis mentioned net metering. We've been talking about that for years because we just really have felt like we don't need to pay above market to bring renewable energy onto the system now, not now that it's well established and whatnot. Also, the cost really matters, not only because of all those people that are on fixed incomes, but we have these policy goals that we are 100% in agreement about reducing carbon. And the more expensive electricity gets, the less compelling it is for people to move away from other fuels for transportation and for thermals. So when I'm talking to someone about, do you want to drive an EV? Well, when you're looking at the numbers, if electricity keeps getting more expensive, it's not going to help with that energy transition. So just another thing, why these feel like there's a tension between affordability and reducing carbon, but actually they could be very complementary if done in the right way. And so that's what we do our work on. So that said, the EC, our board years ago made this decision that they were committed to 100% carbon-free energy by 2023 and 100% renewable by 2030. And we've been working on that and we're doing that. And we could talk more in detail when you have more time. We have experts and everything I'm going to talk about. There's someone I work with who's much more knowledgeable about everything. I'm the generalist and I'm coming in to share with you. But if you're interested in power supply, the next slide. When it comes to that member survey I was talking about, we talked to our members, we're like, what matters to you? We are here to work for you. What do you care about? Every year I've been doing the survey. I've been there 10 years plus. Low cost energy is the most important thing to folks. So we got to respect that. We got to keep that in mind in everything we're doing. Interestingly, renewable energy is in people's brains as being more important than carbon free. We'll see if that changes over time or not, but that is just a little interesting factoid. And when we drill into, do you care whether it's in-state renewable or out-of-state, where people don't really seem to care that much. Again, this is our membership. I've got so much data on our members that if we ever get into an issue, I'll make sure we bring that forward. The next slide is how is our procurement, our energy purchases. You will see that when we buy energy, almost half of it is large hydro. We have direct ties to HQ. We're up there, right? It's very kind of local for us. And I'll just put an idea in your brain, something that we're all going to be paying attention to as we talk about tariffs from Canada. Let's keep this, we don't know yet what's going to be happening with all that, but if half of our power supply is from HQ and then all of a sudden that gets way more expensive, we're going to have to really talk about how we do this. Big issue for us. the whole rec conversation, this is what we buy and then we sell some of the recs, and some people don't appreciate, like they don't like some of that. Our position is we will comply with the requirements and the rules and the laws, and we do, and we've exceeded those every year. And if we have an opportunity to bring some money back to our members, why leave money on the table? If those recs bring value, we can put more money into, keeping our system upgraded and everything that we're doing. So we think it's very smart to run our business this way. And, but we're also very transparent. Here's what we're buying. Here's the recs we're selling. It's all here. We're happy to answer questions about that. Next slide, please. There's a lot of ways to bring renewable energy on the system. Since 2016, we've been doing community scale renewable energy on behalf of all of our members. We go out to bid, we get good prices, very cost-effective way to bring renewable energy. And so we have a program that not only does that, but we also have opportunities for individuals to participate and sponsor panels and get additional value if they are so inclined. I've mapped participation in our community solar across our service territory compared to, say, net metering. And it was just discussed that there's income disparities about uptake. There is. We know that our towns that have lower energy burdens are doing much more net metering than our towns that aren't. And we are doing a little better with our community solar in terms of shifting that. But the next slide, which don't go to yet, you'll just see that's really hitting the low income communities. So there's a lot of ways to do this, and they bring benefits or problems, and we're very experienced in that. So I hope if you get into thinking about these things or these proposals, we'd really love to come back and talk extensively about that. Our community solar program, though, is very cost effective. Another benefit to that is we decide where these projects get sited. And I don't think that's come up yet, or maybe with ISO it came up, or Velco the other day, but we have control with this about where these projects are. And when they're closer to load and they're not in constrained areas, or they're not in a place where we have to upgrade, a substation, that saves everybody money. That's smart, right? Smart to site these where they should be sited, not just because land was cheap. And so that's a benefit to letting the utilities have some control over where projects are sited. We have a lot of knowledge about where they should be, so it optimizes the grid. We retire any RECs that are sponsored for panels that are sponsored. What I love about our community solar program too is you can be a renter. You can participate. You don't have to own your home and put panels on your roof. You can exit at any time. You decide to move out of service territory, you get a prorated share back. So there's no cost shift. Anybody can participate. There's so many good, we love this program. We've been doing it since 2016, and a lot more opportunity there. And the next slide just shows some of the projects. We've had great project partners. This is a project in Alberg, Heinsberg, Grand Isle. And again, we have some other PPAs out there. We have 2 projects in Jericho, one in an old landfill, one in an old gravel pit. Great sites to develop solar versus, other places that are. Next slide. I gotta look at the times here. All right.
Well, I was thinking, I know we're running a little bit behind, which again is my fault. I don't know how folks are feeling, but if we could go till 12:10 does anybody have a new meeting, or would you be amenable to us continuing along? Okay, so if we could give you until 11:40, that feels less bad on my part. And is that okay with our okay? And then everybody else who can stay about 10 minutes later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Where are we? Okay, Lewis reference. So this is the Affordable Community Renewable Energy Program. You all helped make this happen. This was ARPA dollars that went through the state. We were finding that our income qualified folks were not participating in that meeting. We're not participating even at community solar, because even though there was a financing opportunity, that community was not interested in taking loans, and whatnot. We applied when the state put out their RFP, and we were awarded more than $2.5 million in partnership with WAC. Our proposal was to use this Jericho landfill project to essentially provide sponsorship opportunities for income qualified folks. And how we designed it was, if folks income qualified, they would get some shares in this project, and it would equate essentially to $45 a month bill credit every month for 5 years. 60 months of $45, do the math, $2,700 over 5 years, directly to help income qualified folks pay their electric bill. Your bill is $100 a month, you're going to cut that in half. Why does this work? Because there was grant money. A lot of times people look at solar and go, oh, let's just do community solar, and we'll make sure the developer gets paid and the folks get bill credits and the utility will be made whole. Without grant money, it doesn't work. We've been doing this for over 10 years, and we know this. So when somebody says to you, oh, there's this great opportunity and they'll be made whole and they'll make money, there's not enough value in solar for everybody to be made whole or to get bill support. It just, we've never been able to make the math work, and we're a nonprofit co-op we don't keep any of it. So this is an amazing program. We were so happy to have the opportunity. We opened it up. It's all filled up within a few months because we work with these members every day. People call us every day needing help with their bills or going on payment plans. And we're like, we got something for you. And we've been able to help a lot of people. There's a phase 2 to this project. We're trying to work on getting another site going. It hasn't been permitted yet, so time will tell whether we can finish this, do a phase 2. Next chart, energy transformation tier 3. I'll just share, this is part of the renewable energy standard tier 3, otherwise known as energy transformation. The thing we like about how this law is written and guidance is it's very customizable depending on the utility. What works for Burlington does not work in rural BEC territory. Our approach to meeting our energy transformation goals has been land-based businesses, partnerships with maple sugar operations, sawmills, gravel pits, a lot of folks who've been on generators all these years using carbon-based fuels, and we're getting them onto the electrical system. They're saving money, they're reducing carbon, we're getting new sales. It's like this win-win all around. This is an example of a very effective, good program. A lot of the reason it's so effective is because we're able to be nimble and flexible to our service territory. So these are a few examples of sugar houses and gravel pit, and then the last one was JP Resort. We worked with them. They were using propane for their hotel and their water park, and we now have a dynamic electrification system. It's technology. And they added an electric boiler, and sometimes they use the propane, sometimes they use electric, based on the cost of all those things. And they're saving almost 500,000 gallons of propane a year. That's a win for everybody. And so we love this program. You could go ahead, Jake. And we have a whole suite of other qualifying incentives for, whether it's EVs or electric lawnmowers or, so on. And we can get into detail if you're interested in that program. Next slide. And this shows you just how we're doing. That bar, that line, it was our requirements, and we're doing great, and our members are really appreciating it. And there's no cost shift, and it's all just positive. It explains also why it's important to keep the cost of electricity down. If we want people to transition, we can't make it more expensive. Next slide. I'll go quick through the last few. We've invested in some energy storage projects with some great partners. This is community scale. And in 2019, we put some batteries in Heinsberg. And just this year, in partnership with GMP, we put some community scale batteries in North Troy. And we're using them to shave peak and save money when energy is expensive. It's also dirtier usually. So if we can store energy and not have to use energy when it's expensive and less clean, then why aren't we doing more of these? It's expensive. These battery, we have a lot. We've gone out to bid a few times, and a lot of times it's just not working for the money. That GMP one that we did we got some federal dollars, and that's what made that one work. Next slide. We're doing a lot of grid management, load management with home batteries, EV charging, flexible load. We've got a whole host of programs that we've launched. We're learning a lot. The technology continues to evolve. The partners, it's a little just evolving still. People are, partners are in and then they're out, and then, we can't access what we thought we could. So it's early, I would say. Before everybody jumps in, we all need to share information about that. And Mike Burke did such a great job. You could go ahead, Jake, talking about reliability and resiliency. Our COO is doing great work and coordinating with other utilities. There's a lot we could do to harden our system, make it more resilient. I just put the drone photo there. We're starting to use drones more for line inspections, and we have a great case study where there was a problem line that we just kept having outages, things we couldn't get to from the ground, things we couldn't see. We're patrolling these lines. We sent out a drone, found the problem, fixed it. We're going to be using more of that technology. It's been really helpful. We've had some other case studies. Again, when we have more time, I could bring Peter Rossi in and he can walk through some of these, but we're doing some replacement of small wire, and we're trying to move to roadside more and more. Less outages, easier to access when we have them. We'll be doing more of that. So that kind of wraps up. Thank you.
Right. Chair.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about cybersecurity. I don't think we have time now.
Right.
But we also are involved in that part of
right.
things, that part of the policy area. And it's certainly one of my concern about how fortunate, for critical infrastructure, like buildings. So something to hear about from actually.
Happy to bring some people in who are working on that. It's very expensive. It's got to get right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm going to turn the table over to Rep Campbell while I just run out. Just
okay.
4 or 5 minutes, and then thank you so much for being here. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
If this were a different committee room, I could sneak out.
All right, we're going to take 2.5 minutes.
So carbon-free by 2023, renewable by 2030, which means you have some non-renewable carbon-free sources. Is that nuclear? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
And you could see on the pie charts in terms of the procurement and then the final, they're very similar, right? It's just the percentage of the whole that's different. So.
Got
it.
Just a quick follow-up to that question, just because I had some New England in here yesterday. So the system mix has nuclear in it,
right?
But in addition to that, you're purchasing straight up from New Hampshire. So okay.
Same question I've asked everybody. Your transmission distribution lines at this time, where are they at with being able to handle the increased loads? And with that as well, cost to upgrade are going to be passed on to your customers.
Right. What we're seeing, again, we do the IRP and we look at our system long term, and what we're seeing with we feel comfortable that we can handle what's coming, and we're planning and implementing. What sometimes happens, and there's some interesting technology, it's more like the transformers. Like if you put in a charging station and a heat pump and all that, it's more kind of local to like your system in your house and the transformer. Like at that level, that's where more of our investments are needing to be made right now. And there's some interesting technology that is helping us see where there might be strains on our system to say, okay, we're going to get to upgrade that transformer pretty soon. But
and the utility pays for that.
And in our case, the utility is paying for that.
Yeah.
The reason we feel comfortable doing that, and we're not cost shifting. So you're all in on electricity. You got 2 cars and the heat pump and all that. And Scott, Representative Campbell's like, I'm not into this at all. you're going to buy more electricity. And we know that. So we are like, okay, it might cost us this much to put, upgrade the transformer, but we're going to be getting sales from you. So we'll be made whole, and Representative Campbell will need to pay more because you're using an EV. So that's been our policy. I think different utilities have different ways they're dealing with how they pay for things.
Being on the other end of that, I'll say that does, we're spending a lot of electricity now.
I know.
Yeah. Well, the chair is back, so I was gonna say we're gonna move on, but you go ahead.
We're done. No. Thank you so much for
Thank
coming.
you.
Sorry about
Thank
the
you.
scheduling
Oh, no.
mix up, and folks can reach out with any questions, and I'm sure that you'll be back if we're taking notes.
Thanks, Andrew.
Relevant. Thank you so much.
Just say if you listen to Ken.
All righty. So, we'll be back on track. We have 30 minutes. And you could identify yourself for the record, please.
Certainly. Good morning. Ken Nolan, I'm General Manager of Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. Garrett Dunkill, our legislative rep, is in the back. Thanks for having me this morning. I think you're going to hear a lot of the same information that you've been hearing from other utilities, maybe a slightly different take, but generally the same message. Jack, I don't know if you can put the slides up, or I did send them out to folks.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I thought it would be good if you could just go to the second slide in. Yep. Next one. You've been hearing from utilities for a couple of days now, but I thought just to kind of level set, since there are a lot of new folks on this committee, Vermont has 4 different types of utilities. You've heard from the co-ops this morning. Green Mountain Power is the investor-owned utility. I didn't see it on your agenda, but there's actually something called a self-managed utility in Vermont. In our case, it's Global Foundries. An industry that created their own utility. It's for profit, but it only serves them. And then folks I represent are the public power utilities. In Vermont, there's 14 different public power or municipally owned utilities. 12 of them are members of PEPSA, Vermont Public Power, and Town of Stowe and Village of Hyde Park do their own operation. We work with them quite closely, but they're not members of the organization. Interesting business model here, where the co-ops are owned by the members. The public power utilities are owned by their municipalities. So typically the select board or city council is the one who is setting the policy. The town or village manager is managing the utility, and they operate very similar to a typical municipal department, whether public works, highway, water, wastewater, same type of governance process. Vermont's very unique in that we both are still vertically integrated, meaning the utilities both buy power from generators and sell power to retail customers. In most states that have gone to retail choice, utilities aren't buying the generation. They run the distribution or transmission lines, and a customer can buy from wherever they want. It's unique in Vermont to have that happen. On top of that, municipal utilities here are regulated just like all the other utilities. If you go to other states, municipality typically can make its own decisions. A city council can set the electric rates. Here we have to get that local approval and then also get the Public Utility Commission to agree with what was proposing. So it's another layer of regulation and uncertainty there. If you go to the next one. Across the country, I thought this statistic might be interesting. There's about 2,000 municipally owned utilities across the country, serving about 49 million people in 49 states. In Vermont, 1 in 7 customers is served by a municipal utility. So it's kind of interesting here. The city of Burlington is really bounded by the city territories. The city line is the end of the utility. But in a lot of these municipal utilities cases, the municipality that owns the utility actually serves neighboring towns. Some of them can serve 8 or 9 towns in the neighboring area. So that creates some governance issues that you have to deal with, where one town is making decisions that could affect its neighbors. And different municipalities have handled that different ways. So the next one. Similar guiding principles to what you heard from others this morning. Affordability is top of the list. These are local governmental entities. They're constantly getting pressure. Taxes, water rates, sewer rates, electric rates is no different. Reliability, they're very focused on keeping the lights on. Most of them have local line crews, even though they're very small and might have 1 or 2 people running the whole office operation. They tend to have their own line crew to make sure that they can keep the lights on. Sustainability, renewable power is very high on their list. Half of the municipal utilities in Vermont actually were started with hydroelectric plants 100+ years ago. They've been renewable right from the very beginning. And that really has driven the way that they've built out over time. Service to the local community. So a lot of these folks that are on the line crews or running the operations also are on the fire departments, the rescue departments. They do festivals in the community. That's just kind of built into the DNA of how they operate. And local decision making. Vermont is known for local control, and it really drives how these utilities operate. They're very focused on making sure their customers are participating in the decisions that are made. I spend 2 or 3 nights a week going to various local board meetings and community meetings and trying to answer questions that people are bringing up. With that, I want to turn to VEPSA itself. Go 2 slides in. There we go. So VEPSA was actually created by the legislature back in 1979. Originally, we were a power supply agency. We were created around the building of the McNeil generating plant. Several municipalities wanted to buy power from that facility, own a piece of it, but they couldn't raise the capital themselves. So they banded together, got the legislature to create VEPSA. And we actually issued bonds that allowed those utilities to buy part of the McNeil. So if you go to VSA Title 30, Chapter 84, tells all about us. And read it to your heart's content. But the basic premise of what we do is we were created specifically to help Vermont's small utilities reach economies of scale and band together and find ways to reduce costs. So our focus is, we've changed over time, and I'll show you the list of services we do now. But everything we're looking at is how do we make the municipal utilities work more efficiently and work better together. The next slide gives you a list of the members. I didn't put the service territory up, but the stars give you an indication of where we are. Most of them along the northern tier, kind of interspersed with VEC and Washington Electric. Going down the kind of center of the state, Northfield in the middle, Ludlow toward the the bottom third, and then Jacksonville right at the bottom of the state. Burlington they were a founding member of VEPSA. They left for a while, and they just recently come back about a year and a half ago as what we call a strategic member. So they're large enough that they have staff that can do a lot of what we do on their own. But we found that there are ways when we can partner together and become more efficient. So they now have a seat on our board of directors. They participate in the monthly meetings, and we share a lot of resources back and forth. The next one. List of services. So as I mentioned, we started off with power supply and generation. We still do a lot of procurement. We're looking at doing, we built a peaking plant in Swanton back in 2009. That's a joint project. We're now pretty heavily focused on solar and battery development. So far, we haven't found the economics of owning those plants to be viable. We do a lot of power purchase agreements, but even then we're doing them as a joint purchase where we will, as VEPSA, we will enter contracts with the developers, and then we will have back-to-back arrangements with the utilities for offtake. So we can split that, buy a larger project, and then share it amongst. We do a lot of financial services, helping the staff, doing borrowings on behalf of the members, If they can't raise capital or several of them are going in on a particular project, we may borrow the money for them. And then they sign agreements with us. All of their rate increases, rate design, long-term planning, we centralize that. We share staff. So, because a lot of this, you'll change your rates every couple of years. So having utility keep that staff on hand and keep that expertise is very hard. But when we share it across 11, we can kind of spread that out and keep the expertise that you need. We do all the legislative and regulatory advocacy. That's why I'm here. We also work in front of the Public Utility Commission. Something that came up earlier, cybersecurity and IT has become a large portion of our work in the last 3 years. I'd say municipal utilities, municipalities in general, weren't really focused on cybersecurity historically. And we found, because we have a fairly robust IT department, we found if we centralize those services, it actually helps. So we now are doing procurement on behalf of utilities. We're monitoring their networks 24/7. We're setting policies in place for them. So rather than having each of them try to do their own thing, we've kind of combined and we're standardizing the approach there. Do a lot of communications, outreach, social media, press releases, all of that. So rather than them having expertise themselves, we can provide it. The other thing that's really taken a lot of time at this point are more field services. We started with a geographic information system about 4 years ago. As you all might know, I mean, municipalities are notorious for, you've had the employee there for 30 years and everything is in their head. You know, when they leave, it all goes with them. So we're trying very hard to put the systems in place that allow transfer of information. Geographic information system is kind of the mapping of where the transformers are, where the lines are. We stood that up as a central project and we're providing the services to maintain it. We're now doing advanced metering infrastructure. Legislature gave us $5 million a couple of years ago to get that project off the ground, and we're right in the middle of deployment now. So most of the other utilities did that back in 2012. There was federal money available. Our municipal utilities chose not to, and we're doing it now. Renewable energy standard, I'll talk about a little bit more, but that's there's a section in the renewable energy standard law that allows us to comply in the aggregate. So VEPS is running all the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 programs on behalf of the utilities. And then we do key accounts outreach. Next one. Just to give you an idea, I listed the membership. We also do work with non-members. Technically, any utility in Vermont can use our services. We can set that up as a project. Conestoga is part of our McNeil generating plant project. Electric Co-op is participating in the peaker unit. We do power supply work for Washington Electric Co-op and for several towns in New Hampshire and Maine, very small, no staff. And those states don't have joint action agencies like us. So we're able to use our expertise, provide some service to them, and then the revenue comes back as an offset for our members. Next one. Just an idea of some of the economy of scale projects. Talked about the generation. What's becoming more important is financing. There's a huge amount of capital requirements right now in the utility industry. Vermont Transco or Velco every year issues an equity call as they do construction. And because all the distribution utilities are owners, we each have to come up with additional capital to invest in that transmission company. This year, the amount was pretty large, $150 million for the state. Our share of that was about $17 million. So the municipalities, rather than trying to borrow that money themselves, they've asked us to go out and borrow the money for them, which we're in the process of doing. I mentioned the centralized technology, the renewable energy standard, and joint advocacy. Go 2 more, Jack. If you want. On the Res Tier 3, I mentioned we comply in the aggregate. We also run the programs. So VEPSA, on behalf of its 11 members, has rebates available for all these items here. Each year we change what we offer. We change the amounts based on what we're seeing in the market. But rather than having each utility have to run its own programs, we manage all the rebates. We track how the customers are doing, calculate the credits that are attached to that, and then allocate it out to each one based on where the customer is located. Next one. The BRAP, we actually, Senator Sanders was able to get us $1 million in the 2022 appropriations bill as a congressionally directed spending. We did this because what we're finding is, as Andrea mentioned, the biggest bang for the buck in carbon reductions tends to be commercial industrial, the residential programs. And we want to be equitable, but it's really not going to move the needle as you're doing individual customers. Industrial process can make a huge difference. But what we're finding is to get companies to move on projects, they need a big incentive to the tune of $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. And even if you provide that incentive, quite often they can't get the capital within their companies freed up to invest in the project. And we were finding we're spending a lot of time negotiating and just not moving things forward. What we did with this appropriation is set up a revolving loan fund so we can give interest rates that are less than market rates to entice the CFOs for these companies. It looks like a good deal. And then we're able to provide up to 100% funding. So there's no capital on their hands that has to be outlaid. It's just simply approving something that's going to cost them less than market. We've done our first project with Darn Tough Socks down in Northfield, and we're looking for more projects as we go forward. But we're just started. This is the first year that's been up and running, and it's been a pretty good success so far. So, this is another innovative program we're just starting up. It's actually in front of the Public Utility Commission right now, and it's in response to the electric vehicle rate requirement the legislature put in place 2 years ago. We partnered with a company called Bellowatts, a software developer, to create a dynamic rate that people would be eligible to sign up for. So they would sign up in a centralized portal. Any of the customers of our member utilities could do this. And by signing up, they would get a rate each day that follows the wholesale market price. So if they're able to charge overnight, they could get very cheap. I mean, some hours it's 2 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And then if they charge during the day when the costs are very high and transmission could be impacted, they would pay a much higher rate. But rather than having each utility do that, again, we're centralizing and we're running the software package. We're doing the calculation, and the utility is just giving the credit on the bill to the customer. To end with the last slide here. Love to go back and talk to you more about any of these issues if they pop up on your list of items to talk about. But just wanted to put in front of you kind of the things we worry about right now. The impact of recent flooding is huge for the municipalities. A lot of our members are along the Llewellyn and Winooski rivers. Hardwick, Johnson, Linden, Morrisville, they've all seen pretty significant impacts. That translates into two things. One, reduced electric sales because people are out of their homes, businesses haven't come back, so their retail sales have dropped, which makes their economics harder. And they all have seen impacts on generation. Hardwick, Linden, and Morrisville in particular have hydro plants that were impacted, and Hardwick's was shut down with the first flooding. We repaired it. We're just about to turn it on, and the second flooding happened, and they're back to repairing it again. So that's been a bit of a challenge. And also, as municipal governments, it takes their focus away. Johnson, for example, is completely focused on getting their wastewater plant back operational. So they defer to us to run a lot more of the electric side because they can't be managing everything at the same time. I mentioned the competing draws on capital. That's playing out in that Bilka was looking at large build out. So New England is looking at large transmission build out. All of that investment takes capital from distribution utilities. At the same time, we're analyzing what it's going to take if the electrification actually happens the way we're projecting. The utilities, like others, are doing the analysis right now. And we're seeing several $1 million. Morrisville just completed theirs, and they were looking at $5 million investment needed over the next 10 years. So we're trying to think through how do we raise that amount of capital. And then that's combined with electrification, in that the more we're providing rebates and incentives for people to transfer, that's capital that can't be used to upgrade the transmission or distribution system. So a lot of our thinking is how do we balance that to make sure one doesn't get ahead or behind the other. In a similar vein, overlapping state programs, this comes up in the clean heat conversation, in that tier 3, really for the utilities under the renewable energy standard, is encouraging us to help people get off fossil fuels. Efficiency Vermont is also spending money in this area for carbon reduction through their funds, both their efficiency funds and their TEPF funds they have. And now the clean heat standard has the potential to have the fuel oil dealers having to do that as well. So you end up having so many people vying for the same projects, and all of us having regulatory compliance obligations that actually can drive up the cost of getting that work done. Because you're all trying to figure out, how do I meet my own obligation, and potentially fighting over a project. So how those mesh together and how the credits are counted actually is very important. Similar on the environmental policy, we found very difficult in that the renewable energy standard is tier 1 and tier 2, which are power supply based, are encouraging utilities to go 100% renewable. The way to do that primarily is through solar, or in our case, a lot of hydroelectricity. But the hydro plants are coming up for state recertification of their water quality permits. And we're seeing the water quality try to draw down the amount those generators can produce. So you've got, on one hand, you've got the climate policies really encouraging renewable power to be built. And on the other hand, the water quality and wetlands permitting, putting limitations on what you can do. And there's a constant tension there that we're trying to balance. And then the load management, which others mentioned this morning, I would say we are in a different position than most of the other utilities. We are not heavily going into customer-based programs, in-home batteries, controlling devices in your home. We want to make a price signal available so customers can choose to act if they want to, but we really see that as being a customer choice. As far as the reliability of the system, we're more focused on utility scale items that we can actually control and manage without having to have large computer programs and manage thousands of devices. I'm fond to tell my board, it's when I can't get on a Teams meeting without having a technical glitch, I'm very concerned about saying we're now going to get into people's homes and control when their heat pump goes on or when the battery turns on. For price reduction and savings, that's one thing. For reliability, that's a whole different conversation. I'll stop there and happy to answer questions.
Right. One question about non-member municipals. Do they take advantage of the other stuff, programs that you listed? Tier 3 compliance, GIS mapping, advanced metering, those kinds of things, or how do they do that?
Yeah, they can. What tends to happen with the non-members is it's very project specific. So we've done work with non-members on power supply purchasing, some cybersecurity work with them. But it's not, if they want the full suite, typically membership is the way to go, and they have their own internal reasons for not wanting to do that. But we will work very specifically with them if they have a need, and we have the expertise. We'll do a contract to make that happen.
Are they required to meet all these other requirements that all the other utilities have to? I would think so.
Yeah. There are other. We believe we're a nonprofit, state-created entity. We believe we have the expertise and provide the cheapest alternative.
Yeah.
But some folks have relationship with consultants and other things that they prefer, and that's really their choice.
Okay.
Yeah, Corey.
Thanks. In terms of the bond issuance, Is that Vermont Bond Bank? Like, what's your source of funding?
Great question. So historically, we've not been allowed to work with the bond bank. So we have gone, that changed last year. The bond bank actually got some legislation passed that included provisions to allow them to work with us. So historically, we've actually gone to the bond market ourselves. But we actually have a meeting next week with the bond bank to talk about whether with their capability now and what we see coming, whether we can somehow make a bigger project work where they would be in the middle as Laurel was.
Is it NIMO power, Niagara Mohawk power that, and that comes only to the munis?
Comes to the nonprofit.
The nonprofit.
Yeah. Yeah. So we get a small piece. It's called NIPA power, Niagara Mohawk, same thing.
Sorry.
But it's an obligation that New York had to get the federal funding to build that was they had to offer it up to all their neighboring states. So all of the New England states got a piece, some went to Ohio and other places. In Vermont, it's kind of a winding road in that New York sells the power to the Department of Public Service. They're the state representative for that. And then the state DPS turns around and sells it to the utilities.
And for a period of time, the investor-owned utilities or all utilities got a piece of that action, and then it got spun off aside.
Yeah, there were two separate. There's a Niagara Mohawk portion, and there was a St. Lawrence power portion. The St. Lawrence power went to all the utilities. The Niagara power only went to the nonprofits.
And that reduces the munis rates. It gives them lower cost power in their power supply.
Not as much as it used to, but yes, it's cheaper than the market rates. Yeah, under the new with the ISOs, there are additional costs that got added onto that contract. So it's not, when it first happened, it was like 2-cent powers. They're very cheap. Now it's about double that, but it's still less than market.
I'm
Okay. But you're reflecting.
no. Well, you mentioned that the munis weren't participating in the load management of EVs or batteries, and like, is that technology? Can you come down to other than meter control? I think of when you had load management, you had an electric hot water heater on its own meter. So you had the homeowner would have the investment cost of a separate meter. And at one point there was even electric storage heat. So you could see 3 meters on the side of a house.
Yeah, you don't do that anymore.
But is there electronic controls that switch off between the meter at the plug that charges the EV or the battery and a measuring point that subtracts the energy from the main meter?
Yeah, this could get to a much longer conversation. I would want to clarify that we are participating. We don't have the viewpoint that we should rely on customer-based devices for reliability. For cost reduction, for savings, sharing the savings, we're all in on that. We don't think that you should say, I'm going to turn on a customer battery to keep the lights on, because you may not be able to get to it. If you look at where our members are located, they're quite often in places where broadband is not available, or it's just coming as the CUDs build out, they're starting to get it. But where you're talking about the old hot water device programs where you had your separate meter and it was almost a separate account on your house. Now, a lot of the controls are happening by software and using the customer Wi-Fi, where the utility can send a signal from their software through the customer Wi-Fi to the in-home device to tell it what to do, and then gather data on what usage actually happened in the reverse order. So there's no meters necessarily, but there's a much more robust software and communications connection needed.
But you're not dependent on the customer's device or the car manufacturer charger or the battery manufacturer charger software or hardware that reads the software.
Yeah, there is a requirement that end use device has control capability. And quite often that is the manufacturer has built controls into it.
But not the utility owned device. So you're adamant about it being a utility maintained device.
Yeah, we are looking at utility scale. So something that's actually connected to the distribution system. Say a battery, like Andrea talked about, the utility scale, the 5 megawatt battery. That's where we're making our investments. We're not so focused on customers having batteries in their house. If you talk to GMP, their reliability resiliency program is quite heavily dependent on customers having devices in their homes. We are not looking at it that way.
Good. All right. Maybe you guys could continue the conversation
Happy to.
at another time. I want to get folks out of here with time for lunch. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for staying a little bit late. And we will be back here at 1 with Velco, right?